I'm sure you've seen this before. The face of Jesus appearing in a slice of toast. Or perhaps it was a pizza. Or a tortilla? Scientists call it pareidolia.
So we will see faces and all sorts of things.
And today, people who believe in images like this are often not taken very seriously.
I know it sounds crazy, but it isn't. Jesus appeared to me on a sandwich, and it has special powers, I'm telling you.
But what you may not know is that accidental or chance images date back much, much further than the invention of the toaster.
Getting closer to 80, 90 million years old.
Wow. And the line between miracle and coincidence hasn't always been so clear. This video is about seeing faces in places we shouldn't, why we do it, and what it says about us. To start my journey, I've come to State Library Victoria. This is a facsimile, and a pretty nice one, of a book that was originally printed in Germany in 1470. It's a collection of 60 stories, tales from history and mythology that, according to the author, really happened. Some of these stories might sound ridiculous to us today. For example, this one is about the heavens raining down upon the earth to impregnate snails. Back then, people couldn't figure out how mollusks reproduced, so they had to get creative with their theories. Others are more straightforward miracles, like this story about a lamp outside a shrine to the Virgin Mary that never extinguishes, even in rain and wind. But the story that I'm most interested in is this one. Here we see two stonemasons using a cross saw. They've just cut a block of stone in half, and inside, astonishingly, are two faces. The workmen are looking up at each other as if to say, "Can you see what I see?" This particular story comes from 200 years earlier from the writings of philosopher and theologian Albert the Great, and he's cited right here. Albert the Great recorded being a young man in Venice and witnessing workmen cut open a block of marble, revealing the face of a king. But how is this possible? And what exactly did Albert the Great see? Okay, quick detour to look at some holiday snaps. It might seem crazy to try and fact-check a story from a book of miracles, but it turns out you can still go to see marbles like the ones that Albert the Great described. Last year, I went to Ravenna, a city in Italy which was, in the Byzantine era, the capital of the Western Roman Empire. The Church of San Vitale in Ravenna is famous for its mosaics, but it's also absolutely covered in marble. And as I was standing there in this beautiful church, I looked up and saw this. Now, what does that remind you of? People have been writing about this marble figure in Ravenna for centuries. Some people see a hooded monk or a priest-like figure flanked by angels. These symmetric shapes are created using a technique known as book matching, where a piece of stone is cut and then the two halves are placed side by side with their colours and shapes now mirrored. And the face of a king that Albert the Great saw in Venice was one of these book-matched marble slabs. Now, I'm sure this all sounds rather silly because to us today, a rock that looks like a human face is a fun coincidence, a novelty. But to Albert the Great, living in the 13th century, this was important. He didn't just think that the face that he saw was created naturally as if by coincidence. To him, it was painted in stone by nature. In the medieval world, nature itself was a force with the power to create images in all manner of materials, in stones, in water, in fire, and even in the clouds. In fact, this idea couldn't have been more high stakes for the author of this book, writing in the 15th century. You see, the reason this author collected all of these strange stories about rain impregnating snails and a torch that never went out and faces appearing in stone was to prove a specific point. That nature, as an extension of God himself, had the power to produce things spontaneously without apparent cause or obvious explanation. These stories are presented here as proof of one of the most important beliefs in medieval Christianity, the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. So how did we get here? How did a face in a slab of marble go from being a miracle to a mere coincidence? To find out more, I'm going to see a man about a rock.
So this is we would catalogue it now as a piece of limestone, but it's historically been catalogued and is sort of non-technically known as a landscape marble.
Rocks like these, known as landscape stones or landscape marbles, have been collectors' items for hundreds of years, and it's easy to see why. I've come to Melbourne Museum to ask geologist Oscar Lindenmayer what modern science can tell us about these curious rocks.
It's a sedimentary rock, so it's been deposited in probably fairly shallow marine environments, a few tens of millions of years ago deposited.
Wow.
It's what's called a microbialite, so its structures and textures have been mediated by microbial activity.
So is that what creates the pattern? The microbes?
Yeah, exactly. So these sort of branching structures that you can see are what are called dendrolites, and that just means...
The trees?
Exactly.
Dendrolites?
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. So the sort of vertical dome structures that are accompanying them are what are called stromatolites. And so these are the remnants of communities of microbial mats. So they would be sort of a mat coating a dome of sediment, and then that cements another layer and builds up and up and up.
Am I allowed to touch it?
You are?
Can
Yeah.
I hold it?
Just over the drawer? Yep.
Wow. Oh, it's heavier than I thought it would be.
Hmm.
Isn't that amazing? I actually have never seen one of these in person before.
Right.
And it's funny because I feel like usually we focus on these sort of tree-like things, but this like swirling,
Yeah.
is that the dome part?
Exactly, yeah.
They
Those are
look,
the
I mean, they're
stromatolites.
so like atmospheric, kind of like clouds. Does it bother you that I'm like, it's a picture?
No.
Because you're like, no, it's natural. It doesn't mean anything.
No, I think, well, I don't necessarily see a picture as a representation of something out in the world, but I think patterns and textures and, they have value beyond just the scientific understanding they can give us. I think a lot of what draws people to rocks, and especially geologists to rocks, is they're sort of a bit of magpie.
Yeah.
One thing to note is that it was collected sometime before 1897, when it was donated to the National Museum of Victoria, which was one of the forerunners to Museums Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
When it was first registered, it was registered as a landscape marble. So that was the significance that the curators at the time saw in the specimen.
So like what does this object have much research significance today for the kind of questions that we're asking now?
So it potentially could, but I would say not much more than any of the other limestones. I think it's more of relevance to the story of human interaction with the natural world and with geology.
Modern science can tell us how natural images come about, but can it tell us why we see them in the first place? To find out, I'm going to have to see a different type of scientist.
So whatever's out there is projected onto the retina. Whatever's projected on the retina will be turned into effectively three numbers. The output of your long, medium and short wavelength sensitive cones tiled across the back of the retina.
Associate Professor Simon Cropper is a vision scientist who specialises in how our eyes and brains construct images, even when they're not actually there.
Effectively, it's all just fragmented information about what's going on outside, and the brain's job is to make sense of that. In that process, we do an awful lot of filling in.
And that filling in is where we might perceive something in a slightly abnormal way.
Yeah, faces are a good example because we're so sensitive to faces. They are so important to us from birth that we do end up with a very specialised face-sensitive part of the brain.
Simon and his team have done research where they show people noisy images, some with faces and some without, and ask them what they can see.
We found that the predisposition to see a face, to say there is a face present when there was actually none present, vary between individuals and was related to personality. And that particular aspect of personality, which is called schizotypy, which has an unfortunate word because it is not diagnostic of schizophrenia or anything, but there are certain aspects which on the extreme end are similar to traits experienced in schizophrenia sometimes. At its very, very far extreme could be experiencing a hallucination.
If this is all sounding a bit clinical, well, that's because it is. The phenomenon of seeing things in random colours and shapes is called pareidolia, and it inspired one of the most famous names in the history of psychology.
Rorschach is the ink blot tests, a vertically symmetrical image which you can create by putting blobs of ink on one, folding the paper over. I remember doing this at school actually, it was great.
In the early 20th century, a Swiss psychoanalyst called Hermann Rorschach did an experiment. He made a set of 10 ink blot images and asked people what they saw.
There is no meaning there, but you ask people what they see and their response is supposed to tell you all of these things about that person. I would stop short at the response telling you all these things about that person, but it is interesting and relevant that if you have an image that has natural properties, there won't be straight lines, and you give it that line of vertical symmetry, then people will see stuff in it. And it could be a butterfly, and obviously it can be your grandmother or all these other things.
But there was an idea at the time that it was going to tell you something about the person's psyche.
There still is.
And there still is?
People still do use it. And I think it's an interesting one because to give somebody an image that has this sort of central symmetry, this vertical symmetry, which we're inclined to make meaning of, if they make a huge amount of complex meaning of it, they're probably just a little bit more sensitive to making up stuff, to seeing things when they're not there. So there's an awful lot of bias in that.
Modern vision science, it seems, is more concerned with how we see faces in random shapes than what the faces mean. It's clear that seeing faces in nature is a phenomenon that stretches back millennia, something that is innate in us as humans. Somewhere along the way, though, something strange started happening. People began to wonder what it would be like to make their own natural images. I'm in Florence at the Basilica di Santa Croce. This magnificent church is chock full of wall paintings, altarpieces, and architectural details, so it's not surprising that the one painting I'm looking for usually goes unnoticed. In the back of the church is a large sacristy, a big space used to house the robes and the instruments for Mass. This particular sacristy is famous for its monumental fresco of the Crucifixion by Taddeo Gaddi, but it's the wall next to it that I've come to see. The grid of multicoloured squares painted on these walls date back to the early 1300s, and they were painted to imitate marble. But in one of these squares, if you look very carefully, you can see something quite unusual. A monk, or a friar, with a beard, looks down on us from a green panel of painted marble. Now, what does that remind you of? We don't know exactly who painted this face or why, but it signals the beginning of a trend among artists that would take off in the following centuries, a trend that would reach its pinnacle in the work of one of the greatest artists of the Renaissance. This painting is from a series called The Triumphs of Caesar, and it's on loan from the Royal Collection to the National Gallery here in London. It shows a military procession celebrating the victory of Julius Caesar against the Gauls, and it was painted in the late 15th century by Italian Renaissance artist Andrea Mantegna. This scene shows the winning army carrying some of Caesar's war trophies, the armour of the defeated enemy. And there's so much going on in this composition. It's busy, it's bursting with movement and life. So much going on, in fact, that it's pretty easy to miss one unusual tiny detail. Up in the top right-hand corner of the sky, you can make out a face with hollow eyes emerging from the clouds. It looks almost like a mask, or perhaps is it the moon? Now, these paintings have been through a lot over the centuries, damage and bad attempts at restoration, so it's hard to tell exactly what this would have looked like when it was originally painted. But as it turns out, this wasn't the first time that Andrea Mantegna hid an image in the clouds. In the clouds above his Saint Sebastian, for example, we can see a man riding a horse, while in the sky of his illusionistic oculus in the ceiling of the Camera degli Sposi, a subtle outline of a cherub-like face can be seen. And in this painting, in the Louvre, The Triumph of the Virtues, he included no less than 5 faces in the clouds. Looking at these other paintings by Mantegna makes clear what's going on in the top corner of this one. This is a cloud picture. The artist has invented his own natural image. Seeing images in the clouds is a universal human delight, and Mantegna was particularly interested in this phenomenon, and it wasn't just him. There seems to have been a bit of a fad in the Renaissance for painting imaginary cloudscapes with zodiac symbols and magical creatures, as well as creating fantastical rocky landscapes that, if you look carefully, could take on the appearance of a human head. Some of these faces and symbols can be directly connected to the main story of the composition, like Mantegna's horse rider, who could be a reference to Saint Sebastian being a soldier. But many of these hidden faces don't appear to have any clear iconographic links to the painting's narratives. Instead, they reveal themselves only to the most observant viewer, an in-joke that you get to share with the artist if you're clever enough to spot them. So what's going on here? Well, according to modern science, artists might be more likely to see faces in clouds than other people.
One of the things that, generally speaking, I found to be true with schizotypy is that to be high in positive schizotypy is also to be particularly creative. So the more creative somebody is, the higher they're going to be. That makes sense because artists, one of the things they do is they look at things very carefully and very deeply and see stuff in things that people don't see and then turn it into their art.
What Mantegna's cloud pictures really are is a signature. They draw attention to the artist's skill and ingenuity. They say, look what a great painter I am. Not only can I paint landscapes and figures, but I can make nature itself into an image. Natural images have been with us since the dawn of time itself, delighting us, startling us, and inspiring us. Seeing faces in stones and clouds is part of what makes us human, and our desire to create our own natural images is our desire to prove ourselves, to prove our creativity, and also, perhaps, to upstage nature itself. Like, now that we know kind of what's maybe going on in our heads, was it more fun before we knew?
Actually, whilst there are many things that science has made way less fun, that probably isn't one of them, just because it's given a more weight to the idea about how the brain works as part of the natural environment, because we are part of the environment, much that we'd like to ignore it and pretend we're not. That's a good question, and it's one of the few things that science hasn't ruined, I don't think.